on the back of practical and coalface actions. And it's a question around which sanctions lists do we need to check. Now, this sanctions legislation that's coming into force in May is focused on the UK sanctions regime itself. And so the lists that you need to check are very much UK. However, having an awareness of other sanctions that are happening in the world, um, often you will see an alignment, I would say quite often between the UK and EU, specifically because of the UN. Um, and obviously, we generally, I don't know if team up's the right word, but often we see some kind of level of interaction between different governments in order to achieve the objectives that we talked about within the presentation. One country alone going into that fight is not often enough. And so we often do see multiple countries applying the same sanctions to the same individuals or organizations in order to have maximum impact. And so you will see some comparisons between them, or comparables, I should say, between them. Um, so yes, I think it's always good, if especially if you're doing it manually, that's much harder, it's much trickier, it's quite unmanageable, I would say, to have that kind of steps in place because you're going to have to go to lots of individual lists. If you're using technology to support, I think it's always good to have a visibility, and actually whether it would mean anything for you is maybe a question to answer depending on what it is. If it's not on the UK list, the same reporting obligation that we've talked about today is not going to apply. But from a reputational point of view and thinking about, okay, my client is on the EU sanctions list, how likely is it that the UK are going to maybe put a sanction on that same person? So, from a reputational point of view, thinking about that, thinking about who we work with and who we don't. In regards to the US, it's a little bit more complicated. The US have a lot of different rules, and often the tricky thing, if your client is on a US sanctions list, is often that your bank are going to be concerned about that. Your bank are going to be paying attention to that, whether kind of you are or not, because often there are triggers that mean the bank are captured by those sanctions, whether that's the dollar or people with green cards and things working in the business that mean that they're captured by the OFAC sanctions. And so, again, having that mindfulness of them and thinking about, okay, am I going to get paid for this service that I'm providing? If somebody's on the OFAC list, maybe not. So I think having that awareness, although this specific session and the changes that come in May are very UK focused, actually as a matter of good practice, being conscious of the other things going on, I don't personally think is a bad thing. But yeah, hopefully that kind of answers that question in an indirect but direct way. But yeah.